Okay, let's dive right into this explainer by asking you to rethink the very nature of the reality around you. I mean, we've all had those moments, right? A sudden chill in an absolutely empty room, maybe a shadow moving just out of the corner of your eye, or that inexplicable, creepy feeling that you're just not alone. Culturally, we're super quick to slap a label on these experiences. We call them ghosts, spirits of the departed, or we just write it off as our imaginations running wild. But the sources we're digging into today present a completely different and, honestly, a much more complex framework.
Because according to Islamic texts, that rustling wind, that randomly opening window, or that unseen presence in the hallway, it isn't a ghost at all. It's an entirely different creation. We're talking about a fully functioning parallel society living right alongside us, sharing our homes, sharing our world, but entirely hidden from our normal everyday perception.
So let's get into Section 1, the unseen parallel dimension, a coexisting world. To really understand this dark reality, we first need to establish exactly what these beings are. To do that, we look at the theological blueprint provided by the sources. On one hand, you have angels, which are created entirely from pure light. On the other hand, you have us, humans, whose essence comes from heavy, tangible materials, clay and water. But bridging this gap is a third creation, the Jinn. The texts state that Jinn are created from a pure, subtle, smokeless fire. And because they're born of fire, something that naturally rises and doesn't have solid mass, they're incredibly light, agile, and fundamentally intangible to our human senses.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the timeline. The sources detail this rich, incredibly violent history of a civilization that existed, thrived, and ultimately corrupted the Earth way, way before humans ever walked on it. We're talking about a population that reached into the billions. They had a golden age, they had tribes, families, kings, and lifespans stretching for thousands of years. But according to the texts, they eventually fell into extreme violence and bloodshed. It got so bad that it prompted the angels to actually step in and banish them to the uninhabited, lonely corners of the earth.
And that brings us right to the present day, which is summarized perfectly by this chilling quote from the Quran. "Verily, he and his tribe see you from where you cannot see them." It's just a stark realization, isn't it? They observe us from an unseen dimension. They aren't in some far-off galaxy. They are literally right here. They eat, they sleep, they argue, they follow different religions, living parallel lives right alongside us, completely aware of our presence, while we usually remain totally oblivious to theirs.
Which brings us to Section 2, the mechanics of black magic, a pact of mutual loss. Because while peaceful coexistence is the norm, there are some pretty devastating exceptions.
So, what actually happens when these two worlds collide maliciously? The texts are absolutely clear that crossing the barrier between humans and Jinn is strictly forbidden. It's a hard boundary put in place by the Creator. And yet, it happens. People cross it. And they cross it through very dark, highly illicit rituals that we commonly refer to as black magic. The crucial takeaway here is that black magic, or sihr, isn't just an illusion or some cheap parlor trick. According to the sources, it is a very real, highly punishable pact of mutual exploitation. It's basically a transaction. The sorcerer wants something: power, revenge, maybe hidden knowledge. The evil Jinn, which are specifically referred to as shaitan or devils, are more than happy to provide it, but they demand a horrific price in return.
You see, the Jinn don't perform these favors to be helpful. They demand filthy sacrifices, acts of desecration, and absolute worship. They do this to entirely destroy the magician's faith. The ultimate goal of these dark forces is to drag humanity into disbelief and polytheism, basically guaranteeing the sorcerer's ultimate spiritual destruction.
And one of the most terrifying mechanisms of this dark magic is possession, known as mess. It's documented in the traditions that a jinn can actually enter and circulate through the human body exactly like blood flowing through our veins. Now, this isn't just totally random. The texts emphasize that this usually happens when a person is in a state of extreme vulnerability, like when they're absent from spiritual remembrance, in a state of impurity, or if they're directly targeted by a practitioner of dark magic. And it causes massive physical and psychological chaos.
Let's move on to Section 3, Cosmic Eavesdropping, the source of psychic knowledge. Now, all of this brings up a really fascinating question. If Jinn are just another creation, how do psychics, mediums, or fortune tellers seem to know hidden things about us? If knowledge of the unseen is reserved only for God, what on earth is actually happening here?
Well, the Islamic tradition describes the mechanics of the occult as a literal cosmic heist. Check this out. Certain types of jinn travel all the way up to the lowest heavens and quite literally eavesdrop on the angels discussing divine decrees. The sources say they're often pelted by shooting stars as a kind of defense mechanism, but sometimes they manage to snatch a tiny fragment of truth. They then take that single stolen truth, mix it with 100 lies, and whisper the whole mess right into the ears of human fortune tellers.
We absolutely must be clear here, because the texts impartially stress that jinn do not possess actual knowledge of the unseen. Absolute divine knowledge belongs entirely to the Creator. The psychic abilities of the jinn, they're just illusions. They're based on their super long lifespans, their ability to travel around the globe at incredible speeds, and those heavily distorted fragments of eavesdropped conversations. It completely strips away the illusion that they are somehow all-knowing.
Next up is Section 4, the ultimate metaphysical deception, the Dajjal. We need to talk about the absolute most terrifying manifestation of their abilities, one that, according to the texts, will be weaponized on a massive global scale at the end of times.
So while they definitely lack divine knowledge, they possess incredible physical abilities. The sources describe them moving at unbelievable speeds. There's this famous story of an Ifrit, a really powerful class of jinn, offering to grab the Queen of Sheba's massive throne and carry it across continents before King Solomon could even stand up from his chair. But their most dangerous, most disturbing trick? Shape-shifting. They can take the form of animals, or even scarier, they can appear in perfect human form. We're talking flawlessly copying the voice, the face, and literally even the smell of people we know.
And this brings us to a really harsh reality check from the sources. You know that presence in the room the psychic keeps telling you about? The one claiming to be your deceased grandfather named Bob? Yeah, the texts assert that is absolutely not your grandfather. It's a jinn. Mediums who claim to speak to the dead are really just interacting with these shape-shifting, eavesdropping jinn who are playing a deeply manipulative game with human grief.
And that precise deception? That will be the ultimate weapon of the Dajjal, the false messiah in Islamic eschatology. The sources warn that the Dajjal will use jinn to impersonate dead loved ones. Just imagine opening your front door and seeing your deceased mother or child standing right there, looking and sounding exactly as you remember, telling you to worship the Dajjal. It is a calculated deception designed to completely bypass human logic by preying directly on our deepest, most vulnerable grief. Which brings us to Section 5, the illusion of power, why fear feeds them. Now, after hearing about all these dark realities, the speed, the possessions, the shape-shifting, you're probably feeling a little unnerved. But let's look at why fear is actually the very thing that feeds them.
The grand theological takeaway of this entire explainer is right here. Their power is largely an illusion, fed entirely by our own panic. They are not all-powerful gods. They're just another creation. And their absolute greatest weapon against you isn't black magic, it isn't incredible speed, it is simply your fear of them.
There's this amazing story in the sources about the ancient Arab tribes, the Quraysh, traveling through these dark, isolated desert valleys. Believe it or not, initially, the jinn living in those valleys were terrified of the humans and literally ran away. But the humans, being spooked by the dark and the unknown, started praying out loud to the quote-unquote spirits of the valley for protection. Well, the moment the jinn sensed this human fear and reverence, they realized they had the upper hand. They stopped running, turned right back around, and began to terrorize the humans. The moment you show them fear, they will pull out every trick in the book to exploit it.
And this builds directly into how humans are taught to protect themselves in this framework. It's not through fancy magic amulets, and it's certainly not through chanting to spirits. It's through pure, fearless faith and spiritual hygiene. The vulnerable target is the person obsessing over fear, weak in faith, or dabbling in the occult. The strong defense is simple: maintaining regular prayer, remembering the Creator, and absolutely critically, refusing to give these beings the fear they so desperately crave. Which brings us to this number, 0. Because according to the foundational theology of these sources, 0 is the exact amount of independent power that jinn, shaitan, or black magic have to harm you. They can do absolutely nothing without the ultimate overarching permission of the Creator. Their power is entirely restricted. So I want to leave you with this thought to chew on as you process this explainer. If a parallel society of unseen beings relies entirely on your panic to manifest their strength, if their ultimate weapon is simply your fear, who really holds the power in this dynamic? Ask yourself, How much power are you handing over to the shadows simply by being afraid of them?